And a very good evening to you. Welcome to Politics 101. It's a Wednesday night. Good night to those of you who are joining us from further afield in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom, in France, and Ireland. I know quite a few of you are joining us from out there in Ireland, in Scotland. Welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who are joining us from the wider Caribbean, a special welcome to you. Wednesday night edition of Politics 101. We're going to be joined by Nigel Hughes. Nigel Hughes is going to join us. He has made contact with me, running a little bit late, but he will be here. So please share the link as we prepare for tonight's program. I had a good program last night. We had Amanda Walton this year, and Henry Jeffrey last night, in a sense, engaging in the discussions about the approach to constitutional reform. Amanda argued that the Constitution is not the problem, it's the people who are leading. And Henry Jeffrey says, well, yes, the people who are leading are important, but it is precisely the fact that human beings, although we are inherently good, we have a tendency to be flawed when we are in certain circumstances. Hence, we have to create rules in order to control the situation. And I did put on the table those two famous sayings. Human beings, by our very, very nature, we are good people. But it was Thomas Hobbes who said that mankind in his natural state, his life will be short, nasty, and brutish. And so therefore, although we are born good, we are inherently good. When faced with circumstances, when faced with unlimited power in our hands, then we can become bad. And how do we mitigate that? Well, first of all, we mitigate it by creating this thing called government. Government is supposed to save us from ourselves, And when we create government itself, because it's a creation of human beings, it can take on the bad tendency of human beings. So then we have to create rules. Hence the Constitution. We have to create constitutions that are able to control these impulses on the part of those who govern. So Arthur Lewis puts it very well. He said, democracy is about form and substance. The form is the means by which you elect people. You have elections and you elect people to govern. But then who governs? Is it the majority that must govern? Is it a supermajority that must govern? Is it 50+1? Is it a minority that is governed? So Arthur Lewis says that all those who are affected by a decision of government must be at the table to make those decisions. So we have these overriding principles. Human beings, by our very nature, we are good. However, human beings, when we are faced with unchecked power, when we are in the possession of unchecked power, when we don't have situations that will mediate our actions, we can become bad. And so therefore, there is need for this thing. Imagine, as I would tell my students all the time, jumping in your car and leaving class or we're leaving work, and if there were no traffic lights, we wouldn't get home. You wouldn't get home. And so we had to create traffic lights and other forms of mediation in order to bring some sanity and balance to our human experience. But then who determines the traffic lights? It's the government. And who makes up the government? Should that government be just a majority, 50 plus 1, the representatives of a majority? Should it be the representatives of a super majority? Who governs? Who makes those rules? And how do we determine whether traffic light goes at point A or point B? It means that we have to have rules of engagement, hence the Constitution. The Constitution is very important. It is very important. But if we have a Constitution that gives an advantage to one sector of the society, then the Constitution itself is betraying the principle of justice and equity and equality. So there is need always to upgrade our constitutions, to bring our constitutions in line with where we are. The Constitution that we got at the time of independence reflected the arrangement at the time of independence. The British were leaving. They wanted to make sure that they were leaving these outposts, but they wanted to have a global control over these outposts. So they left their institutions, even though they were leaving. But Britain as a society, sociologically, ethnically, is different from the society they were leaving, that they created in these colonies. But they left us a constitution that was in line with their sociology and their ethnicity and culture. And ever since then, the struggle has been how to make the Constitution consistent with the lived realities of our country. And we have had a bad 6 decades. And we are now into another round of constitutional reform, so the government says. And the question that Henry Jeffrey posed last night, what is it we want out of this constitutional reform? And Sister Mans, of course, says, well, you know, we have to make this constitution that we have work, and we have to have the people have to change, you know. You know, there's an argument there. The point is that you end up by saying that the constitution we have is not bad. It's Jack Dio and them who are bad. The assumption is that we are good. So remove Jack Dio and them and put we, and the constitution will work. That is the logic of where a man's argument is going to take her. And I think Jeffrey and I were arguing that, oh no, we've had 6 decades of good people and bad people. And it's about time we talk about a constitution that can bring out the good in everyone, that can frustrate the bad in everyone. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101 on a Wednesday night. We have Nigel Hughes. He's ready to roll. This past week, Nigel gave an address to the Burnham Foundation. They had a forum to mark the 101 anniversary, birth anniversary of Forbes Burnham, and Nigel was the keynote speaker, and he gave an address that is titled Guyana needs to restart from ground zero, zero-sum politics. We need to restart from ground zero, zero-sum politics. So we're going to talk to Nigel about that. He's not new to this issue. It's something that he has been part of, he's been talking about for a while. I remember under the coalition government, as I mentioned last night, they had set up a committee. I know Nigel was part of that committee. I think he was the chairperson of that committee, but he will correct me. But I know the late Duke Pollard was on that committee. I think I may be wrong. I know Aslin Paris was part of that committee. I think Professor Lotchman might have been part of it, but I remember appearing before that committee and giving my views on what I thought should go into constitutional reform. That committee presented its report, not anything was done about it by that government. And here we are into constitutional reform again. What do we want out of this constitutional reform? We're going to be talking to Nigel about some of these issues because he is nominated as a member of this committee. Not sure who he's representing. I rather suspect he's representing one of the opposition parties, but he will tell us. So we'll talk to him about that. And of course, we'll try to get his views on some of the current issues of the day. The teacher strike is ongoing. The government has been busy banning children from singing political and social commentary calypsos. Nigel is a person who has articulated the importance of art to shaping a society. Art as a form of expression, as a form of nation building. So he should have something to say on that issue. So wherever you are, please share the link. Please share the link. Welcome to you. Wherever you're joining us from the East Bank of Demerara, East Coast of Demerara, the West Side, whether you join us from Region 9. And if you're a teacher, special welcome to you, a special salute to you. The teacher strike is now into its third week. We are now Wednesday, so 3 days of this week, and we had the previous 2 weeks. Initially, the teachers said that they were going to be on strike for 2 weeks, and they have now gone beyond 2 weeks. And I just came off of a program with Normal Brown, and I was asked the question whether the strike is political or not. And I said very frankly, as I've said on this program, the strike is political. All strikes are political. All strikes are political. And I said that I refuse, and I think I speak here for a lot of the so-called professionals on our side. I refuse, after all the sacrifices me auntie and me mama and all them make to send me to school, to make Jack Dio determine the meaning of political for me. Yes, the strike is political. What we mean by a political strike is not what Jack Dio means by a political strike. All right? So we must not surrender certain concepts to them and let them determine. We make that mistake with race. You know, every time you say, I love myself, I am black and beautiful, Jack Dio said, you're divisive, you're racist, and we buy into that. So we allow them to determine and define what racism means. And we have to stop it. Don't allow them to define for us what these concepts mean. We got enough educated people, school people on our side to determine that for us. Right? The strike is damn well political because the strike for bread is a strike for justice. And the strike for bread and justice result from a denial of the government in this instance, a denial by the government of people getting equitable access to common resources. And insofar as the teachers are withdrawing their labor in protest against that, then they're carrying out a huge political act. Do not let Jack Dio and Irfan Ali define for you all what political means. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. Welcome to Politics 101 on a Wednesday night. Let me bring in Nigel. They say, you know, you have to keep your cross-examination for when the lawyer appears. Consul, good evening. You have to turn on your...
Sorry about that. David, good evening. Apologies for being a little late. And if I sound a little hoarse, it's because I'm done with this really dreadful flu. But again, first time for the year. Very belatedly, Happy New Year. And my commendations, as always, for your commitment to the struggle for a
Thank you.
better Guyana.
Thank you. Your thoughts on the teachers strike?
Oh, I absolutely support them 110%. I was listening to your last comment, couple of comments, and this is a fight for their share of the common resources. We have to start. I was in the end of the presentation last Friday to the Burnham Foundation. I kept seeking to remind the audience that the wealth that we have now is our wealth. It doesn't belong to the government. And it's not for the government to distribute it in a manner in which they think is fair. It Everybody is entitled to their fair share of the oil proceeds. The teachers cannot possibly at 6.5% survive. And this is a just fight. What I will say though, in relation to your comment just now about all strikes being political, you're perfectly correct when you say that what Mr. Jagdeo says is political and what somebody else says is political is not the same thing. What Jagdeo is attempting to do when he says it's political is that for him, political in Guyana means race.
Yes.
So that message is intended to send to the teachers who are of his ethnicity to say that you are on the wrong side of this fight. But this fight has nothing to do with ethnicity. This fight is for 6.5%, if irrespective of what your ethnicity is. This is a teacher's fight for fair wages. And so when he says it's political, he's beating that drum in the hope of driving fear into those teachers who perhaps he thinks owe him some level of loyalty on a different level, and that they would then break the strike, so to speak, and stop striking. But I have to commend the bravery of all the teachers, but particularly those who Jagdeo has made the presumption um, are supposedly his supporters. Because this strike, I see the teachers in Region 5, the teachers certainly in Regions 2 and 3 as well, which are not, which are his traditional supporters, he would like to think, um, have come out for justice. This is not a Guyana political, because in Guyana politics means race,
Yes.
and this is not a racial battle. This is not a battle that is based on race. This is a battle that is based on fear, on a fair demand for just rewards for labor. And David, as you know, education is the most important thing for the future of Guyana, particularly as it has this level of resources. You cannot possibly hope to manage the sort of wealth we have with a poorly educated population. And I know that you're going to get to education and where we are at some stage, but how can you possibly, with 50% dropout rate for people who are in secondary schools, 50% not completing, not put education as the highest priority? I would say higher than infrastructure. Education must be the priority in any future development of Guyana. If you want to take the countries that have had no physical resources, like Singapore, which everybody likes to cite as an example, it was the investment in the human resources by way of education that allowed a nation that had no natural resources to become the number one nation in that part of the world. That's where you focus all your resources. No, not all, most of them. Because it's no point having the best infrastructure on the planet and you don't know how to plan. You wouldn't have the best infrastructure if you don't even know how to plan. And we could talk about these new highways that they're talking about at some stage. So education is key, and the key to delivering a first class state of the art education system is the persons who are responsible for delivering education, the teachers. And they, apart from being appropriately rewarded, and I'm not just talking about salary here, to start with, we've ended up in this extra lesson syndrome because of economic challenges the teachers were faced with. We have to get back to a state where teachers don't have to worry about their bread, as you said just now. They must be able to dedicate their energies towards teaching, whether we provide them with long-term mortgages at low interest rates so they don't have to worry about accommodation. We must be able to provide them with the best continuing education going forward, and they have a concomitant responsibility to deliver high-class students to the Guyanese population. That to me is a no-brainer. So how are we now hoping to um, starve these teachers at 6.5% when you have given, what was it, 666 billion to for infrastructure and
Yeah.
100 and something billion? It just boggles the mind. Absolutely boggles the mind. But forgive me, I was going on a bit there.
Yeah, no, 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 you're quite right, because I like where you've taken it. Um, Linking the teachers' strike to an upgrading of our education. Now, one of the
Actually,
things,
could I
yes,
just,
yes,
I don't say upgrading. I think we need to revamp our education system, because you cannot have almost 50% of your students dropping out of secondary schools and say that that is not a crisis. That doesn't need upgrading. That is a whole revamp and rethink that is needed. You cannot have, while some students on the coast top CXC and top the Caribbean with 22 subjects, 22 A's, sorry, and then you have Reverend and Hinterland students who get 0 A's in the same country of less than 1 million people. That is a part of apartheid. That is a system of apartheid. And saying to me that you're going to pour more money into infrastructure means you have missed the problem. The problem is not infrastructure. We used to go to school under trees and in backyards and cramped bottom houses and produce some of the finest scholars in the world. So Arthur Lewis, you pick them and you will find out quite often that they didn't go to posh schools. It was the delivery of that product of education. And so again, to say that I have spent $50 billion on building schools in the hinterland and river areas, and not a single child from that community in 2022 was able to get an A, you don't have to be a genius to realize that you're putting your resources the wrong place. So I don't say revamp. I think we have to restructure our approach to education.
restructure our approach to education. We in the Working People's Alliance have said a long time ago we need to have a state of emergency
Precisely.
in our education system. And look, we came out of slavery and colonialism, and one of the things we came out with was with our foreparents had their eyes trained on education. The first thing they do is build school and churches. You know, when we came into independence, Mr. Burnham, government, despite whatever excesses they may have carried out, certainly focused on education. Nigel, you and I are products of that. Education, given the nature of our society as post-plantation, post-slavery society, education has to be a priority, as you have said. It has to be a priority. And in a time of windfall, a time of relative plenty, and you are sitting down and say, what now? What are we going to do? How are we going to distribute that? And education is not in the top draw. Then, as Nigel Hughes is saying it tonight, something is radically wrong. And so the fact that the teachers are on the streets, it doesn't have to do with something that the teachers wake up yesterday morning and feel that they want to give the government a hard time. It's that they are grappling with this crisis, and they're trying to fight a fight without the tools, one, and secondly, without the sustenance that are needed. That is, how do they reproduce their labor power every day to go into those classrooms and to try to salvage a situation that has gone to rock bottom? All of that is in the demands of the teachers as they're out there. It's a struggle for bread. It's a struggle for justice. It's a struggle for equality. And it's a struggle for our birthright. Because as post-slavery and post-indentureship or systems, we education has come to be that thing. I don't care who you are. You can be a lawyer, you can be a businessman, you can be whatever you are. You will have to point right back to education. To education. Today I can reflect on Emiya and Paulette Wilson, who used to hold me on with a pencil on a slate and teach me to write. That is beyond teaching. That is serious love. You got to get serious love for the kids, serious love for your country, to be carrying out that, to be teaching children how to read and write, and more so, how to reason and to make sense of our circumstances. Nigel Hughes, thanks so much for taking us in that direction. And as you, go ahead, Nigel. You go
No, I
ahead.
was going to say, somewhere along the line, we thought that education was an end in itself.
Yeah.
Education is not an end in itself. Education is a tool. So one of the things that we have to share with the next generation is that whatever level you acquire, whether you become a PhD, an MPhil, a master's, whatever level you obtain, that is not the end of the journey. The end of the journey, well, it doesn't have an end. It's an ongoing process, is that education is merely a tool. It is perhaps one of the better, if not the best tool that you can have, but understand that it's not the end in of itself. Now, I think what happened in colonial society, because we were so oppressed, David, I just think about it. I think back in the days of Mr. Burnham, you had one scholarship. So it meant that of all the hundreds of bright people you had, only one was going to get that scholarship. And so it meant that several equally qualified and talented people were condemned to professions or occupations which did not allow them to use their best asset, which is their brain. So education in those circumstances, given all the pressures, and of course we lived in a colonial society where depending on the color of your skin, you look down on other people. For a lot of people beyond the boundary, CLR James, to be able to move up socially, education in and of itself brought a certain level of respect. But I think we didn't quite realize that education was just a means to an end. Thank God in 1976, education became free to everybody. A lot of people were against it as a result of the propaganda at the time, but there were people who finally got an opportunity to rise above the circumstances they would otherwise have been condemned to. And so that we must always appreciate that education is a very important tool, but it's not an end in of itself. But I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood by saying that if you have an academic career, it doesn't mean that you're not contributing. You're more than contributing, because you're molding the future of the society. So I just want to make that comment, and I find it difficult how in a time of plenty, any government, not this one, any government in a time of plenty can seek to diminish the importance of education and reward for the people who are responsible for delivering it to the future of the country, the children. That amazes me. And the fact that you would actually have some sort of tactical position that you're not engaging and allow a strike to go on for over 2 weeks in a time of plenty is really very, very disturbing. very disturbing.
Very disturbing. When we look across our Caribbean, we see in a place like Grenada, where the average teacher's salary is 1,800 US dollars as compared to 600 US dollars in Guyana. You take Trinidad and Tobago, 1,500 US dollars, the average teacher's salary. The average teacher's salary in Guyana is $600. St. Martin, the average teacher's salary, $2,800 or thereabout. The average salary in Guyana is 600 US dollars. I mean, we have the lowest average teacher's salary in the English speaking Caribbean. A Guyana that was at one time had one of the highest, if not the highest, literacy rate in the English speaking Caribbean and in the British Commonwealth. In the British Commonwealth, education, therefore, was always a premium. A premium. And here we have our teachers out there just begging for the barest necessity. There's a linkage between the teacher strike and the quality of education in Guyana.
David, I think the comparator that really highlights this, and all those figures you gave are excellent, is that in a country where the economy is growing at 20 plus or 30 plus percentage, faster than the entire Caribbean multiplied by 10, because there's no country in the Caribbean that's growing at 2%. We are past 20%. We still have the lowest rate at which we pay teachers. And we find it possible to boast expressly and implicitly that we are the richest, we have the most resources, and yet in our wealth, we pay the least amongst those countries that you've identified. It is a real sad reflection on all of us, because in 20 years, when they start to look back and analyze what we did wrong, this would be one of the principal issues.
This will be one of the principal issues. Nigel Hughes here tonight. Welcome to all of you to Politics 101. Please share the link. Please share the link. We have a lot more to talk about. We don't catch Nigel as often as we would, because, of course, when you're Nigel Hughes, there are 1,000,001 things that you have to engage with on a daily basis. You all know what I'm talking about, so I don't have to spit it out more. But here we have him, and we're going to try to squeeze as much as we can. Nigel, you're a student. You're a student of art. You're a student of popular music. You are one of those who intertwine your law and your politics with the lyrics of a Bob Marley or of a Mighty Sparrow, and understanding the web that is for our Caribbean. And you obviously would know that colonial government had a disdain for popular music, the lyrics of popular music. We know that post-colonial governments in the Caribbean, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, have had to contend with the uneasy presence of the Calypsonian, always asking questions, always probing, always holding up those in authority to rebuke, social rebuke, always holding up our institutions to scrutiny in ways that the folk could understand and associate with. We are in the month of February. It's Mashramani. We just finished the greatest show on earth, as they would say, in Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. It was astounding there to see Machel Montano, who you would know as a little boy, saying they say are too young to soca. I remember him coming on stage with a baby, a baby Pampers, and saying that they say too young to soak. He became the soca king, but he then pivoted this year into social and political commentary. And to say, they say too young to soca, I hope they don't say no, we're too young to engage in social and political commentary. The rest is history. He's now the Calypso king, the Calypso monarch of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the Calypso monarch of the world, but across the border in Guyana. Little Machel Montanos are being disqualified from singing calypso. 6-year-old girl with the movements of the calypsonian, with the stage presence of the calypsonian, with the relationship between mind, voice, and movement. You can look at her and you say, that's a calypsonian there, 6 years old. And her calypso is banned. She's disqualified because they say she's too young to be singing social commentary, singing about the 6.5 increase to the public servants. And then, as if to rub pepper, they say salt in the wound, to rub pepper and salt in the wound, another child was disqualified because of a poem that deals with the cost of living. Nigel Hughes, I know we live in Guyana and we have been observing this thing forever. We know Guyana is a problem place. But if anyone had told you in 2024 we would have had a government banning little children from singing uplifting lyrics in calypso, what would you have told them?
You know, David, you've touched on. Oh, I don't know. I try not to get too emotional here with this. You remember back when, and if you read history, people used to frown on calypso.
Yes.
It was considered poor people music.
Yes.
It was considered black people music.
Yes.
It was considered not worthy enough to be celebrated throughout the community. Go back to the centipede bands and you go back to history, the kind of fights that took place, they just get recognition for the art form. All of us today jumping up at soca and stuff and so on and so forth, but we have completely missed the history that it was always social commentary. And it was always used by those in power who had bad intent to suppress. They always suppressed the art form. They tried to keep it in the ghetto, they turned it down. And when they realized that they could make money, all of a sudden it started to become acceptable. The point that I'm poorly trying to make here is that we assume that because we're living in contemporary times, those that are vested with power over the state organs would change their approach to the art form that ridicules them. Calypso, soca, parang always attacked those people in authority and held them up not only to account, but to ridicule when they behaved badly. That has always been the underlying essence. As you come through the era, whether you're talking about David Rudder, reminding people about Haiti, you think about he was a minister in the Trinidadian government who did Little Black Boy,
Gypsy.
Gypsy, talking about, you know, who's the conductor, who all it has always been there, and it has always been uncomfortable for those people who are in office. Censorship is not new. What happens here is that I don't know of any occasion where a 6-year-old child has ever been the victim of that level of censorship by the entire state. This is not the headmistress saying you can't say it. This is the state coming down and saying to this little child, in her creative best, because that whole art form is based on creativity. It's not an art form based on repetition or learning something by rote. It's a based on creativity. The entire art form, we have produced absolute geniuses here. Peter Minshall, 2 Olympics. You pick them. And you were talking about the intellectuality of Guyanese, whether it's a Rodney, whether it's a Martin Carter, whoever, whoever you pick, it's creative genius. And here you have two people excelling in that particular genre of creative genius, not only being frustrated, but being told that this is not the way to go. That demands a response from all of us across the society, across the ethnic divide, across the politics, to say this is not what we are about. We are not about censoring 6-year-old people. We're not about censoring people who are writing creative commentaries on where we are today. This is not somebody who is saying, strap yourself with suicide bombs and run into the parliament. That is not what this poem is about. This poem is about something this child has observed going on in the society that they would like to bring to our attention by way of an art form. What are we really saying here? That this is something that we must be condemning and saying to this little person in their creative prime that you can't do it? No, it's we're in a bad place. We are really in a very, very dark place when that happens.
Very dark place.
Remember, Martin Carter got locked up, but he was an adult.
Yes, yes.
He was an
yes,
adult when he got locked up for his poetry
yes,
and
yes,
political activity.
yes, yes, yes. And I was just going to reach for Martin Carter and to say he described them as assassins of conversation.
Absolutely.
Assassins of conversation. These are the dark people we have who are governing. I mean, Jeffrey last night went and do the research, and he found that banning a 6-year-old child from performing art is equal in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the next country you have to go to. So you are quite right, Nigel. We are now parallel with an ethnocracy, you know. And when you go for children, that's deliberate. You are beginning the whole process of control and domination. What are you saying to these little children? Okay, go on stage and dress up nice and wind up and dance up. And I don't frown on that because that's part of the culture too. But when you are saying that that alone is art, and you are trying to tell the kids, don't worry, with social commentary and political commentary, you are beginning to shape a society that are inconsistent with the values of independence and freedom. Nigel Hughes,
Aren't they also saying, because you say if it's okay to wind up and dance, but I have a difficulty with that, because what they are saying is that all we want you to do is dance up and wind up.
Yes.
In other words, all you're capable of doing is dancing up and
Dance
wind
up
up.
and
Don't
wind
worry
up.
to think. Don't use your brain. But as long as you're winding and you're dancing, be comfortable. The second you deploy your brain to address the social circumstances, it can't happen. Says where the priority is.
You all hear the message. You all hear the message. And I said earlier that, and I think I speak for Nigel and a whole host of others here, our parents did not make the sacrifice to send me to school. And we got those limited opportunities that were denied so many others who weren't at the same place, at the same time, in the same circumstances to take advantage of the opportunities that we have had. And it's an insult to those of you who have made the sacrifice for us to allow Jack Dio and others to define for us what reality is, to define for us what is art, to define for us the meaning of race and racism, to define for us the meaning of apartheid, to define for us the meaning of political. I refuse to cede that ground to the rulers, these rulers, or any rulers. And I just want to make that clear. Not just these rulers. I refuse to cede that ground to any group of rulers who can define for us or who feel they can define for us what our reality is, including what the meaning of words are. I think you all make too many sacrifices to allow those who would like to push us right back behind the gates of the plantation to define reality for us. No, 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 I refuse. I refuse to do. Martin Carter said, no, I refuse to still my voice. I have too much to claim. If you see me looking at my hands or listening when you speak, know that I look for fire. I've learned from books, dear friends, of men who could not die because death was far too poor, of men who could not sleep to dream,
The dream to change the world.
but dream to change the world. No, I will not still my voice. The poet speaking, always, always the artist, speaking for us, to us, and helping us to make sense of this torrid society and the torrid world that we have to make livable for all of us. And that's what the teachers are doing out there. They are trying to make our conditions much more livable in a time when God and the ancestors have smiled on us. And we know that when you're poor, that smile for some reason don't last too long, you know? And so when it's there, we've got to take advantage of it. Um, Nigel, I made reference to constitutional reform and that you were chairperson of that committee.
I
That
was
was,
convener. Yeah, I was convener. It had a
you were
lot of
convener. And I was
very,
trying to
very.
get some of the names right. I
You
remember,
remembered a lot of them. Very erudite. We had Professor Lutchman, uh, Duke Pollard, Professor Duke Pollard, Hazeline Paris, um, no, Justice Gino Prasad,
yes,
Gita Chandan was on that, Stephen
yes,
Fraser. We had two youngsters, Stephen Roberts, and the other one is at the AG's Chambers. His name is going to come back to me. Yeah, we had a good team. And we had the important. The present government likes to attack that committee, well, not the committee, the work that was done. We, as you, I'm happy that you said that we interviewed you. We interviewed you. We interviewed Ravi Dev. We interviewed Mr. Ram Sahoy before he died. A very, very wide range of persons, because the purpose of that committee is that you have to try and get a sense from the people of what they see is important. Melinda Janke, we interviewed, Van der Rat, a whole set of people. And it's important that people don't get the impression is what it's not what we want to see, is that we have to get a sense of, first of all, the frustrations people have with the present architecture, where their frustrations are, and then we distill this and get it into a document that captures the essence of the society. The Constitution is not a cold document. It has to do with creating what works for you. One of the things that I'm disturbed about in common discussion now is that we are going to be Dubai. Dubai is Dubai based on what happened in Dubai. Guyana, with, for God's sake, with all the bright people we have had, all the people that we have had, we have to create our own. We have to create our own vision of what a modern Guyana is. It can't be a replica of somebody else unless that person had an identical historical experience as we did. The good people of Dubai and the Emirates came out of a different type of struggle. We have come out of a struggle of exploitation of all the ethnic groups, starting with the indigenous when the Europeans found that they couldn't work. They then went and brought the Africans wholesale. When they were getting rid of us, they then brought the Portuguese. People don't like to acknowledge this. Portuguese came here as indentured. They brought the Chinese. They came here as indentured, and they brought the Indians. They came here indentured. So the history of Guyana must, at least in its constitutional arrangements, ensure that never again will an economic system that led to that level of exploitation and barbarity ever emerge at all. But every day I see activities that seem to be walking us back voluntarily into a neo-colonialist state. And we're not having discussions about these because we're so blinded by the ethnic differences, we can't even begin to see the real challenge that is pushing all of us in a particular uh, direction. But enough of me and my rant for that.
Yeah, yeah, but you're not going anywhere because I've put your words on the screen there.
Actually,
Um,
let me just factually, the Burnham Foundation asked me to speak on this topic. They identified the
you
topic,
identify the topic.
and
Yes,
I was in agreement with the topic. So if let me just make sure that that bit of history is there.
wonderful. Guyana needs to restart from ground zero, zero sum politics. I will not stand between you and your explanation of what you mean by that.
Okay, I think historically, for those who um, knew Mr. Burnham and knew my father, it is probably a bit. Actually, it's like you, David. It's like if you went to speak to the Burnham Foundation, people would, it raise a
Yes,
couple of, it would
yes.
raise a few eyebrows. But it's perhaps is a commentary on what has happened over the over the years. Be that as it may. In 1950, 1st of January 1950, Chetty Jagan and Forbes Burnham, as representatives or perceived as representatives of the two larger ethnic groups in Guyana, got together and formed the first mass-based political party in Guyana, in British Guyana, sorry, the People's Progressive Party. The entire country was, at that time, from reading, I wasn't alive, but from all historic records, the entire country was committed to this new Guyana. They were fighting colonialism. Independence was a principal subject, and the entire country was uplifted and felt motivated to the extent that in 1953, when they had the elections, the People's Progressive Party, consisting of Burnham and Jagan in the leadership, Burnham chairman, Chetty Jagan as leader, won an overwhelming majority of seats. Preceding the People's Progressive Party, you had the Political Affairs Committee, PAC. That again, Chetty Jagan, Ashton Chase, because everybody understood in the struggle to create a better Guyana, it was necessary, whether symbolically or otherwise, to have representatives or persons who were perceived to be representatives of the two larger ethnic groups in Guyana. In 1955, the leadership had problems, real problems, and they split on ideological grounds. The leadership. The membership of that party, or the party that emerged, first it was called Burnhamite PPP, and then I think People's National Congress. But the membership of that original PPP and the rest of the population, when those two leaders split along ethnic lines. The level of political consciousness of the people, the membership of the party, and the people of Guyana was not ideological. So, in other words, it wasn't as if the African people went with Burnham because of socialism as an ideology, and it certainly wasn't because the Indian people went with Jagan because they felt that communism was their ideology. Quite the contrary, actually. But it split on ethnic grounds, even though the leadership split on ideological grounds. When it's split on ethnic grounds, and the ultimate goal is political power, you can't expect the persons who were running for office in those particular parties not to take advantage of the best marketing inbuilt tool they had, which is race. When they're appealing to get the people to the poll to vote for them, race was a given. It was your number one marketing criteria. And so what then happened was the ethnic entrepreneurs took over. Now, it didn't mean that they ran down the road. I hear the story about Apanchat, but it didn't mean they ran down the road saying, vote for Chetty because he's Indian or vote for Burnham because he's African. But the effect was that. And so after that, the country continued at the membership level of those parties and the level of the population along their ethnic ways. But the leadership was split. Burnham became prime minister, and he was socialist and a lot more moderate and palatable to the Western world. If you fast forward to Desmond Hoyt after Mr. Burnham died in 1985, country is in deep economic trouble. The International Monetary Fund comes in because that's the only way we're going to survive and says, your socialist experiment has come to an end. You are now in the market economy. The Berlin Wall came down. And so the only political philosophy that existed was market economics. So both the PNC and the PPP, by the time Hoyt came to office, were not ideologically separate. And after the PPP came into office, they followed exactly the same economic programs that had been begun by Desmond Hoyt as a result of the arrangements he had with the International Monetary Fund and other agencies. Remember the big privatization? Everything was going to private hands. So neither party, and from the time the PPP came to power up to the time they lost power in 2015, the presumption was market economy. APNU AFC took over, market economy. PPP back in power, market economy. So there is no ideological divide. The WPA came in the 70s and started talking heavy ideology. But we didn't have an ideological divide after Hoyt got there. The only divide we have is ethnic. And you will remember for a long time, it's probably only in the last 5 to 7 years, nobody wanted to discuss race. People were afraid to even mention race. I remember when you started your social media programs, people thought he's talking about race, he got to be racist. The fact that you spoke about race equated you to being a racist when it's the most fundamental part of our being. We have to be able to talk about it. And in Guyana, where we have no ideological differences, and where the argument is not what is the approach of the PNC to the police versus the PPP to the police, or what is the approach of the PNC to small businesses as approach to the PNC PPP. We don't have those arguments in elections. This is a straightforward, brutal race debate. No, the question is, you first have to acknowledge, it's a bit like being an alcoholic, that race is what divides us. And the only way you can begin to address it is by acknowledging it. But you had two national parties, and I understand why it is difficult for them to say that we're a national party and we're not racist, because somehow they equate being a national party with being the exact opposite of acknowledging that you have a race problem.
Yes.
Whereas it should be the contrary. If you are truly a national in Guyana, you should be prepared to discuss the one cancer that we have that is killing us, which is race. It doesn't stop you being any less nationalistic. As a matter of fact, what we have is perhaps the greatest insult to the population. We parade people of different ethnicities who are not ours and say, look, we're not racist, when we know for a fact that they do not exercise the same level of influence and power in the political organization that they operate in. And I say that with great respect. There are a lot of great people on both sides, but that is the political reality. So let's discuss what has always kept us back. And now I say that we are at ground zero -1 for this reason. 1st of January 1950, ground zero, when we were beginning to fight for our independence, excuse me, and talk about a new Guyana, Jagan and Burnham were on the same page politically. The races were united, and they had a common enemy, which was to fight the colonialism. That's ground zero. We are back to the position where there's no ideological difference. So the political parties ideologically are the same place. It's a market economy. But unlike 1950, our races are the furthest apart because there is nothing unifying them in the leadership of either party. Absolutely nothing. And so that is minus one, because at least Burnham and Jagan brought with them their respective constituencies. They didn't even have respective constituencies. They weren't divided as yet. They brought with them the collective dreams and aspirations of the Indian, African, and progressive peoples of this country. We are at a stage where both parties subscribe to the same ideology, but there's no leadership, none, that brings together those two major ethnic groups. And so we are at minus one for that reason.
We are minus one. Nigel Hughes here tonight on a Wednesday night, Politics 101. Want to thank all of you for coming through as usual. Good evening to you, Esther Barron. Good evening to you, Michael George. Good evening to you, Carl Wong, my brother. It's good to see you. Good evening to all of you who have taken the time to be with us. Annette Cummins is always here, Rhonda Spencer. Good evening to all of you, Marlin, Lorimer. Welcome to Politics 101, and thanks for being faithful. We have started, of course, the Politics 101 bulletin, where we put in print some of what is said here, kind of summarize it in new thing and so on, because we want to make sure that we have things to the record. So that's an addition to Politics 101, the Politics 101 bulletin. Nigel, so you have been named as a member of the Constitutional Reform Commission. The government, after bawling, screaming, finally after 3 years and more, have decided that they are about to begin constitutional reform. Like I said, you've been nominated, named as a member of that commission. As you go into this process, what is uppermost in your mind as far as the objectives of constitutional reform in 2024?
David, let me start by saying I haven't seen any terms of reference. So to start with, I've been nominated along with other people by the opposition parties. So we haven't seen the terms of reference. If the terms of reference come and they are unacceptable, I don't suspect that the people who are nominated would necessarily stay, because if they come back and say, "Oh, this Constitutional Reform Commission is only going to look at pick something ridiculous, voting in the East Coast or something," then you don't really have a commission. And if, or similarly, if the terms of reference were to say that we are to look at the recommendations of the previous Constitutional Reform Committee, which was headed by Ram Karan, then we're wasting time. So a lot depends on what's in the term of reference. So I want to manage everybody's expectation by saying we hope that this is really a real opportunity to address the real issues that have caused the nation state of Guyana trouble over the years. So the first issue is that one of the obvious issues that has confronted this country from its birth, at independence, is the amount of power that is vested in the head of state. Certainly since the 1980 Constitution, the head of state is vested with complete executive power. We accept, I think now we all accept that we live in a multiracial society, and there are serious differences between us. We have different ambitions, different ideals. And so the decision-making process of the state cannot be vested in one individual at any time. There has to be effective, meaningful participation of all the groups that exist in the society. And I don't mean just political or ethnic groups. You got civil society groups. We have a mirage of interest in this society, and they all have to be able to get to the table and be heard. So we have to devise a political system that allows, first of all, everybody to get to that table, two, to be heard, and that their real concerns are addressed and protected. I'm not advocating this as a solution, but in Suriname, to become president, you have to have, I think it's 65 or 70% of the vote of the members of the National Assembly. That's a good start. Not saying we will reflect it here, but at least then the president can at least say that I have the confidence of a significant part of the population. We have and have had for a while one seat majority or one seat minority governments, which means it's one single seat or maybe two seats that separate the government from the opposition. But if you look at the National Assembly, it is a complete and absolute waste of time because the opposition has zero influence, zero, whether moral, persuasive, or actual, in on the policies of the government. Quite frankly, I don't know why they bother to go to parliament because it makes no difference. And the population is so um, disappointed with the level of discourse that takes place in the National Assembly that if we bother to look at it, it is for entertainment purposes and nothing
Mhm.
else. You cannot run a modern country where people look at your parliament for entertainment purposes. And you cannot run a country where the opposition's ability to influence development is zero. It's not close to zero, it's zero. So, how are you talking about building a modern society with that sort of political architecture? And I would assume that the commission will take views from various persons. I'm sure it will be mandated to travel throughout the country, or I hope it will be, so that we can get a real sense and document what it is that people find is not working and what they have difficulties with about the existing system.
About the existing system. Last night we had Amanza Walton Desir and Dr. Henry Jeffrey on, and quite a robust discussion on the role of constitutional change. And one argued that human beings will have to change for Guyana to work. That even if we were to have constitutional reform, if the human beings are not good, if the politicians are not good, the thing is not going to work. The other side argued that precisely that's why we need constitutional reform to ensure that the human beings act within the confines of the rules and the laws. Speak to that binary, that dialectic. Is there merit in both arguments? Is there a way in which we can pull the sentiments of both arguments together?
Well, I have to confess my sympathies to the latter argument.
I know.
We we ca- we have to build constitutions and constitutional architecture on the basis of our assumptions of the worst amongst us, not the best.
Yes, yes,
Because if the best existed, we probably wouldn't need a constitution.
yes, yes.
It has to be on the basis of the worst amongst us, or that those that we elect at some stage will pursue their most, I don't want to use the word evil, but will pursue their most undesirable objectives to perpetuate themselves in power. So we ought to start at that basis. I think Guyana, I say this with great respect to Amanza. The conduct of people is not going to change by virtue of the passage of an act or constitution, or constitutional change. The only reason we obey traffic laws is because of the enforcement. It's not because you pass them. So if people didn't know they'd get locked up and charged for jumping a red light, we would jump the red light all the time. So I don't have a lot of hope that we will get a different set of politicians. As a matter of fact, all the politicians tell you that they're the best thing since sliced bread. And if that is so, even if 10% of that was correct across the board, we wouldn't be in these difficulties because they would start off from their conduct by accepting the other side and not have what passes for engagement in the National Assembly. Um, I don't buy the behavior argument because we don't all come from the same social background. We don't all come from the same educational background. We don't all come from the same historic background. So, unlike monolithic countries like Japan, where you have essentially one race, you can say you have a monolithic culture, but Guyana has never been that. So, hoping to change conduct by way of constitution or other legislative change, I don't think it's going to have the desired outcome. Let me say that we have to go on the basis of um, assuming the worst of us. And a classic example is this. And this circulated, I know, in third world thinking in the 70s, early 70s to mid 70s. And I go to Nairi and that whole movement. Western democracy, with the big swings between right and left. Guyana, we had two left wing parties, but let's say the big swings between right and left and the consequential big changes in economic policies of the various parties in the third world. This is not a first world problem, this is a third world problem. Where the election cycle was only 5 years, wreaked havoc. So there was a view, may not have been the most democratic view, that if you want to transform your society, the country couldn't afford the luxury of swinging between policies that were dedicated towards changing real social and educational change and right wing which says, oh, you must you're standing your own 2 feet, capitalism is what it is. Jamaica is a classic example. Between Manley and the work Manley did between 76 and 80, and Siaga, and what happened after he came in, and the impact it had on the Jamaican people as speaks to itself. So there was a view. It wasn't a, like I said, it wasn't a democratic view, but it just says that that kind of swing had an adverse impact. And so we have to look at data. This is one of the things I did mention at the Burnham Foundation. The most important and objective criteria we have to look at the data to see what the impact is. Because a lot of people hated Manley by the time the 1980 election came around, but like Burnham, probably disliked by the same time by 1980, the social change that took place, free education, the lifting of people out of poverty, was significant, but it didn't have a lot of support. And then when you are fighting in an environment where the propaganda that is coming to remove you from office, externally funded, etc., from a purely developmental perspective, you have a real issue. But we're in a different world. Like I said, we're in market economy, democratic principles. So all of that is irrelevant. But I only say that to say that we really have to have some common yardsticks by which we measure progress. Because I'm sure if we talk about progress or what progress means to Mr. Jagdeo, and if we talk about what progress means to Mr. Norton, they have a completely different sense of progress. It doesn't, or measuring progress, it doesn't come out in the discussions because we're so caught up with other things. But I get the sense that Mr. Jagdeo believes that once you've got infrastructural development and money is passing through the economy, somehow this is going to inure fairly to the citizenry. Don't know how that's going to happen, but I think that's his approach. Whereas I get the sense from Mr. Norton and some of the people who support him that they believe that if more resources are spent on your social cap and the individual members of the society, from education, social services, development, etc., it will inure to the benefit of the country. And neither of them has said anything about making sure that we have data, disaggregated data, that we could begin to have a discussion. Because If, as I tried to show earlier, none of the indigenous people are making it in the educational world, then that's a crisis to me in the indigenous area, and therefore demands a national response. But the national response is, now we're going to build more schools for you to fail. We have to make sure we give you better teachers and better methods of teaching, including perhaps teaching in your own language, so that you begin to have a better chance to qualify. And so we should do that. When I was in politics, I advocated there were three areas that we should agree together nationally: education, health, and foreign affairs. We should have no dispute about that. We should agree a master plan, 15 to 20 years, sign off on it. You could tweak it where you want, but we can't afford the changes every time you get in government. It's where it is. But sorry, I drifted a bit. But to come back to the question you posed, I am clearly in your camp, because I don't believe that we can moderate behavior by by the Constitution.
I
Everybody has to be committed. Remember, this so-called dreaded Burnham Constitution, which has some of the most advanced features in it, was hated as a Burnham Constitution. Yet it magically worked for every single government after he died.
yes, yes,
So
yes, yes. And I remember at the time of the 1980 Constitution, Guyana, I was a young man at the time, put in my hand a copy of the PPP's proposal for the Independence Constitution. And when I read that thing, there was much difference between the Burnham Constitution and the PPP's Constitution. In fact, the PPP's Constitution, in some regards, was more ridiculous because it came straight out of the communist playbook. Uh, and I've had my sympathies with communist countries and so on. But communist dictatorship, capitalist dictatorship is dictatorship. And one of the things dictatorship has shown is that it ain't get killer when it comes to
oh, absolutely.
ideology. Uh,
Exploitation is exploitation, however you dress it up.
oh
That's
yes,
it. It's you
oh
know.
yes. Oh yes. Nigel, we haven't had a chance to talk about Venezuela, and when you come back, we will speak more lengthy about Venezuela and what's happening in the Gaza, with
Mm.
the Palestinian situation there, what's happening with the Russians and the Ukrainians, what's happening in the United States of America, because all those things would have an impact on what's happening. We have the oil spill there next door in Tobago, which is ominous as far as we are concerned. But I just want to get your thoughts on that whole process that led to the Argyle Agreement and what has happened since then. We know the teacher strike has sucked up all of the space, and so we have not paid much attention to what Venezuela has been doing. But I would like to get your thoughts on that subject.
Um. So David, I used to comment on my Facebook page asking for a friend, particularly in the Venezuela situation. Let me say this. Um. When Venezuela started in the 60s, we knew then, and we thank Mr. Burnham for his perspicacity, if we can use that term, that the only chance we have against Venezuela is diplomatic. We don't have the population to build an army that will be able to be a deterrent. We never had the resources previously to be able to acquire the sophisticated military equipment and know-how to be a deterrent. And therefore, all of our resources were dedicated to diplomatic efforts. It didn't matter whether it happened in '66 when we signed the Geneva Agreement. It didn't happen. It didn't matter whether it happened late '70s, early '80s with Mr. Burnham. Didn't matter when it happened. No. What I will say is this: since we knew that diplomatic defense and diplomacy was our only strength, it meant that our resources at all times had to have been dedicated to that solution. Whether we had a threat from Venezuela or otherwise, That was always the problem. And once we had the Geneva Agreement and there was no final solution, that was our defense. That's why, and I don't mean this as a criticism. We have always had, certainly in the position of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, our best and brightest,
Mhm.
absolutely
Yeah.
critical. It's also why we have always had in the upper echelons of the foreign ministry our best and brightest. It's also why we have always appointed to international positions our best and brightest. Marash Jackson, Rudy Encinali. We had Riyad Encinali at one time in Washington because we recognized that this is our only forum. We had the successful example during the non-aligned period of making sure that we kept people in the non-aligned sphere of influence, India, South Africa. We played such a great role in the liberation of Southern Africa, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, that we were a natural um, ally and we enjoyed a natural support. I don't know if we fell asleep on the job, but that's my view. We fell asleep on the job, or we assumed that because nothing had happened for so long, that Venezuela would not be a problem. For me, the Foreign Service must do constant analysis of what is happening globally. If they had been doing their work, they would have realized a long time ago that Maduro was in political problems. Long before now. Long, what are we, 2024? Since 2015, 16, 17, he was in political problems. And we would have asked ourselves, what do people who are in political problems do? A range of things they do. What do they do to galvanize support? If they have resources, they distribute it and make themselves popular. If they have an issue like the border, like a claim over another country, everybody becomes patriotic. So we must have known that it would be a constant threat to Guyana that Maduro would at some stage beat this drum. And therefore, in anticipation of beating that drum, we should have been reminding all of our friends, CARICOM. CARICOM should have, from the time you say Venezuela, every single capital of every country in the Caribbean must have automatically gone to the fact that they understand the full history. They don't have to think about it. And this is our plan of action. We will start with condemnation, blah, 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 blah. That's the level of readiness that we should have maintained all the way. Africa, from the time that happened, the African Union should automatically know, well, hey, this is the problem. As much as Venezuela is in the progressive left or whatever they want to call it, this is the situation with Guyana. We have the Americans have become very important to our political process. Let me put it that way. We must have ensured that whoever was at the Latin American desk and when Guyana got elevated upwards because of the oil find was on the ball about the history of this matter so that if Venezuela did anything, we'd react. But here's the killer. In the capital of Barbados, Bridgetown, a Caribbean prime minister facilitated and accommodated an agreement which was going to lift the sanctions off of Venezuela. Let's just stop there for a minute. If you're lifting some sanctions off of Venezuela, what it means, Venezuela will have more money to do what it wants with a political leader who is in trouble. So where's he going to put some of that money? Into fighting us. We should have been on the ball so that Mia understood that there's no way she's going to facilitate all of, as much as it is dressed up as potential return of democracy to Venezuela, any process that was going to improve the resources available to Venezuela after they had a they had sanctions against them without a commitment that they were not going to do anything for Guyana.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's how much on the ball we should be.
Hmm.
We should have been on the ball that when Venezuela was canceling the national debt of St. Vincent, we should have anticipated that St. Vincent's loyalties would be there.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Now, if you have a foreign ministry that is looking at all the scenarios globally, all of this would have been worked out as a possible scenario. The Americans do it every day, the Europeans, the Russians. What are the possible scenarios? And so we should never have reached the stage where, excuse me, Barbados should have been facilitating the removal of the sanctions, and we were not at least in a position to say to St. Vincent, excuse me, at the same time that Venezuela was canceling their national debt, the Guyana has a program that will offer you comparable or better returns. Excuse me. We come from a common history, and you understand that this is critical not only to Guyana's interests, but for our ability to be able to support you in the future. That is competitive politics. So we missed that ball. And what we did was we beat the opposition into the position where, having missed the ball on all these occasions, you say, well, you got to support us here. This is a national issue. When in effect, it is your complete failure to have been on the ball that put everybody in a position where we all started to sing, and it's a bit like a revivalist, you know, "Oh, God is going to come tomorrow and we're powerful and blah blah blah," when we should have said, why did we miss the ball? When did we miss the ball? And what are we going to do to make sure that we don't miss the ball again? Who is analyzing every development that takes place? And we celebrate Argyle as if it was some great achievement, when in effect, if we had been on the ball, there would be no Argyle. There'd be no need for Argyle. And so the level of our discussion and intellectual resources really has to be channeled towards dealing with the truth. How we end up there? How I reached the stage where I got to come and knock on David's door in the night to say, help, I get through out. When I wasn't paying the rent, David didn't say to me, hey, look here, take care of the situation.
Yeah. 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 Brother Nigel Hughes here tonight, speaking on a range of issues. And, time is going, and we will have to get Nigel back here sooner, sooner, sooner. I sometimes am a little bit shy of calling on Nigel regularly because I
I'm
know
available.
I feel so bad when people say, you feel it, you have little manners and so on. Don't call on the man too steady, the man thing and so on. But Nigel, you'll have to come back shortly for us to continue these conversations. You've raised some really, really important angles tonight. We started off with the angle, of course, of talking about the state of education and linking that, or linking the teacher's strike to the state of education. I think that's a dimension that I have not heard discussing. That is why these discussions are important, because they help to bring to the table perspectives. Not that our people are not thinking about these things. They are always thinking about these things. But as Guyana would say, what we do as activists and academics and so on is that we take the people's experiences, refine them, and then we give them back to the people's political nourishment. But it's their vibrations that we take and put it in analysis. Anything, Nigel, you would like to say that I didn't ask you, but you would like to leave it our audience?
I am the effects of my flu,
Yes,
unfortunately, are getting to me. Excuse me.
Take your time.
I want to thank the Burnham Foundation for putting that topic on the agenda about sorry, David.
Yes, take your time. Yeah, I know that thing is. Yeah. Nigel Hughes there, really coming through it tonight, and the flu, that flu thing is going, and it really racks up. But I would like to thank Nigel, and here he is. He's come back. All right. Yes, it is. Nigel, thank you very much, and we will have Nigel back as early as we can. As early as we can. I would like to thank all of you all. I notice Marilyn Samuel is here tonight. Neil Mendez. Welcome to all of you. And tomorrow night we'll continue our discussion. I'm having Eric Phillips and Vincent Alexander and that group here tomorrow night, Akumo Gunse, and we are going to look at this from another angle. As usual, love is the watchword here. We're going to be talking tomorrow night again.